Hello and welcome to the Oak Spring podcast, where we celebrate the legacy of Mrs. Bunny Mellon through the work of the Oak Spring Garden Foundation. I'm Chris Stafford and this is Season 2, Episode 5. Hello and thank you for downloading the Oak Spring podcast. On this month's episode, we're going to be talking about farmers today. Our guests will be Jason Myers-Benner, who is a home-scale farmer and plant and chicken breeder, and Christine Harris, who is the director of Oak Spring's Biocultural Conservation Farm. And we'll also have our new segment, Continuum, with Janelle, who is the Director of Programs here at Oak Spring. All that to come, but first I have a few updates for you on what's been happening and what will be happening this month at Oak Spring. In May, Oak Spring is hosting a convening of regional stakeholders to discuss seed saving and sharing native seeds for cultivated and wild plants. In April, we hosted 2 sold-out open days and our 3-week botanical artist in residence and 2-week interdisciplinary residency courses. Oak Spring's 2026 residency and fellowship application closes on May 31st, and this includes all 4 of Oak Spring's fellowships. That's the interdisciplinary residency and botanical artist in residence. And don't worry if you missed our April open days. We have 2 more tour dates coming up on Friday, June 27th and Saturday, June 28th. These will be the last tour opportunities of 2025, and the self-guided tour includes the change to see Mrs. Mellon's garden and the Oak Spring Gallery. Again, those dates in June are Friday the 27th and Saturday the 28th. Our first guest is Jason Myers-Benner, who is a home-scale farmer and plant and chicken breeder at his family's Tangley Woods farm in Kieseltown, Virginia. Jason's work is focused on understanding and enacting bioregionally adapted forms of sustainable agriculture, both at home and with others. His experience includes breeding heritage-type varieties of chickens to better support ecologically minded farmers in our region of the country. Jason, welcome to the Oak Spring podcast. Thank you for taking time to come indoors.
Thank you so much.
I'm sure indoors is not your happy space.
You're absolutely right about that. Yeah, always been true.
And since a child, you have been in the soil, so to speak, as a boy.
That's right. My parents tell me, I don't have much memory of this, but they tell me I had my first garden when I was 4 years old. They called it Jason's Pea Patch. And they say I was very, very focused on those little plants and seeing what they were going to do.
So obviously, as a child, when we grow up in the country like that, that we are following in some family steps, some maybe parents' footsteps. Tell us a little bit about your background and your early background and your parents' relationship with the land.
Yeah, well, neither of my parents were farmers per se. My dad had worked on farms some as a young man, but the community he grew up in would have been at least partly a farming community that was transitioning more to semi-urban or suburban ways of life. But he grew up Mennonite, and I was also raised in the Mennonite church. And so there was some connection there with people who still at least valued that connection to the soil. And on my mom's side of the family, which was not Mennonite, there was not nearly the long history. See, my dad's side of the family would have been in southeastern Pennsylvania for 9 generations. So it was quite a long-rooted history there. My mom's side of the family were more recent immigrants from Hungary and Sweden. But my great-grandfather was a farmer up in northern Wisconsin. And my mom was born there and born in that area and really valued her connection with my great-grandfather and with that farm. And so when my parents got together and established a family and a home, they definitely had in mind that it was going to be a country home. And we did live in the country. They had the kind of the 70s back to the land idea affecting them somewhat also, I think. So that was the kind of home I grew up in with that sensibility. But with my mom being a doctor and my dad being a pastor, we didn't have a lot of spare parental time for those kinds of activities. But they still kept starting things, kept trying things, and for whatever reason, I was probably the one of us five kids who just really zeroed in the most on the gardens and the fruit trees and the chicken flock, and just my fascination just only grew over time. So I would say that I certainly didn't grow up on a farm. I grew up around farms. I have relatives who are more involved in farming, and so it's not a straight line from my past to my current interests, but um, it certainly makes a lot of sense when you look back.
So join up the dots for us then, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get from there to where you are now at Tanglewoods Homestead?
Yeah, so I was so very focused on these things, I decided that I would really like to work in farming or in agriculture in some way. When I went to college, I came to Eastern Mennonite University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And at that time, they had a major called International Agriculture. And with some of my mom's work doing international relief and development kind of stuff with a medical focus, that appealed to me. I had some exposure to economic justice and kind of medical and nutritional justice issues. So I did major in international agriculture, which was kind of a sustainable agriculture major, basically at that point, but with the notion that people would be trained to be volunteers or have a career in international agricultural development work. And I graduated and promptly did not do that, but instead focused on paying off my bills and getting set to establish our own farm. And by the time I graduated, my wife and I were engaged, and we got married soon after my graduation. And I got work in agriculture right away, but that didn't last too long. It was kind of a poor situation for me, and so switched to construction work, but which is something I had known growing up also. But then that didn't satisfy me for very long. As soon as we got college debts paid off, I got itchy to get back into the soil, and so I started volunteering at local farms. And then once my wife Janelle got a full-time job that supported us well enough, I said, "How about I instead actually work at a farm, even though it's not going to pay as well as the construction work?" And so I was able to find work at a blueberry farm in Kieseltown, Virginia, Hickory Hill Farm, blueberry, grape, and peach at the time. And I worked in all three of those crops. And then as when our daughter was born, I decided to stay home with her. And but I was still working part-time at that farm, and we knew we were looking for a place in the country to be able to do our own thing. And the farm next door to that blueberry, peach, and grape farm became available. The neighbor had been renting it long distance and finally decided to sell. But she didn't want to put it on the market. She wanted to make sure the right people got it. So we wrote her a letter and, asking if she would be open to talking with us. And she didn't write back for a long time. We thought 3 months later, well, I guess nothing will come of that. And then we got a letter in the mail that said, "Yeah, let's talk." I was just giving the renters an opportunity to buy it, and they've decided against it. So let's talk. So she came up, and basically she was living in Georgia at that time. Came up and kind of interviewed us for a weekend to see, were we the right people to take this place? Because she had loved it, so hard. She had put so much of herself into building the house and developing the gardens and things, which were in poor repair by the time we got to them. And I guess she decided we were, and she was willing to accept what we were able to pay, which was a tremendous gift to us, and made it possible for us to move here. And so we did that, and we spent a number of years rehabilitating the house and getting systems back up and running, and then we were able to turn our attention to the land. And of course, we've always had to have other employment alongside of that. And for a long time, that was my wife Janelle working at EMU's Center for Justice and Peace Building. But now she was there 22 years, and then has recently, past few years, has moved away from that. But we have now been able to pay off this place, and so here we are doing as much as we can of what we love, which turns out to be, as we followed our noses, breeding and some systems development work for basically, I guess you would call it sustainable agriculture, and trying to understand what it takes to keep us alive here on this land. We probably eat the majority of our food comes from our own land. We do buy a lot of chicken feed, but most of the eggs get sold away from the farm. But we don't really have other saleable products beyond the eggs. A little bit here and there, but not much. The focus is on breeding and sort of tuning agriculture to this locale. And we enjoy that work very much. It keeps us very busy.
And would this be entirely non-livestock then? Are we talking about chickens and produce?
At this point, it's chickens, produce, and then there's a few pets. My one daughter just started a quail project that's mostly going to be focused on just having them, and the other daughter has some ducks that she's had for a long time. We do raise pigs every year for consumption, so you could call that livestock, but since it isn't anything that we sell at this point, I usually don't talk about that. And because we're not breeding them, it's basically we're just feeding them out on scraps that we get from businesses in town and butchering them once a year. So.
And how many acres are you on then there?
It's a total of 6 acres. It's 2 different parcels, but the one is basically just a little wooded addendum to the rest of it, and about half of it is open, and of that, maybe another half is intensively productive. So, maybe an acre and a half of pasture, roughly, about an acre and a half of woods and grain, not woods, gardens and grain ground, and the rest is young woods.
Tell us then in more detail, Jason, about your heirloom garden and grain varieties and how you select those.
Yeah, of course, each species has its own sort of set of requirements and what you would be aiming for, and so the selection methods vary. Our aim has been to kind of knit together a system of plants that, and including the animals, the chickens and whatnot, knitting them together into a sort of an interdependent system that feeds us. So let's say with crop rotations, let's say a vegetable crop is highly consumptive of the soil or kind of hard on the soil in some way. And it might need to be followed with a different vegetable crop or with a cover crop or with a grain crop that has different requirements of the soil and might help to even build the soil back up or heal it. So we use a combination of what is it we like to eat, or what is it we think this ground is well suited for, or what's needed in the farm ecosystem. We use a combination of those things to make our choices of what species we want to work with, but also with which varieties of species. And in some cases, you'll have a variety that you might think, oh, we just can't grow cantaloupe here. That was one of our experiences, and so we might say, well, that's not really an option. But then we said we're not ready to give up yet, so we got 4 or 5 different varieties of cantaloupe that all sort of seemed within the bounds of what we would be interested in, and we tried them all. And there was one kind that worked the best for us, and we assumed that there would be some crossing back and forth between the other varieties and this one with the flowers. And we said, that's good. We want the diversity. But then we're going to just save seed from this one variety plus whatever ended up getting crossed in. And then we also purposely mixed it with another one that had done well locally for a neighbor of ours. That was Minnesota Midget. And the one that we started with was Caravel. And so we did purposely allow those two to cross. And so we've ended up with something very similar to Caravel, but which is a lot more reliably productive in our particular location. So whereas usually we would get 1 year we get a good crop, the next year an off crop. Now it's more consistent year to year, and so now we just continue to maintain and develop that. And with melons, just as an example, they're a pretty easy thing to select because you pick the fruit, you taste it, and if it's delicious, you save the seeds. A lot of others are a little bit more complicated than that, but with melons, with peppers, with tomatoes, it's pretty simple in that regard. Squashes. Um, so that's I think maybe that's the synopsis. But then for things like popcorn, which our daughters have gotten interested in breeding, um, they what they do is they shell off from each plant. They'll harvest either the 1 or 2 ears, sometimes 3 that it'll give. Usually just 1 or 2, and they'll shell all of the seed from those 1 or 2 ears into one container, and then we dry it. Well, oftentimes it's dried before shelling, but we might dry it further, and then pop a percentage of it. And if it tastes good and if it pops well, then and it had shelled well when we were shelling into the cups, then it's a keeper and it goes into the seed supply for the next year. So that's a little more complicated, and you have to have a certain amount from each plant to be able to pop enough to test. But that's kind of our entertainment. Some of our entertainment in the winter is popcorn taste testing.
How much of your land is then commercial and has to be commercial, in addition to obviously being self-sustaining and feeding you as a family?
We really haven't put much attention into the notion of commercializing any of our land. We think of it as our home, an extension of our home, and it really, from an ecological point of view, it really is focused on sustaining us. So our money doesn't come from agriculture for the most part. There's, as I said, just a little bit comes in from eggs and from selling chicks and selling pullets. And then occasionally we've sold some seed, but not much. So we have decided that putting that economic pressure on gardens of our size would probably kind of ruin the fun, and also make it almost impossible to focus on the the seed breeding that we feel I need to do. However, it is with some of the chicken work. It's starting to branch out just a little bit now, where some other people are getting interested. Oak Spring Garden Foundation has been carrying some of our chickens for a long time, with Nick Setti as the manager there of the chicken project, and that's been great. And we've had other people from time to time who have taken flocks, but there's a local farmer this year who wants a fairly big flock of one of our hybrids, where we cross 2 of our original varieties and get a hybrid. And another place that has expressed interest in 80 or so pullets. So I would say that it's hard to extract. It's like the chickens are using pasture that's in amongst everything else, and then some of that chicken work, almost all the eggs are sold. So is that pasture commercial ground? Well, it's also we also harvest the hay off of it to use for mulch in the gardens, which feed us. So if I had to take a pot shot at like what percentage of our whole land, if I could re-extract all of that, I'm gonna just say like 15 to 20%, and the rest of it goes towards feeding us.
And how many chickens would you currently have then? I'm sure it's hard to do a head count every day, but approximately, if you have so many, what are you aiming for? So
we have 3. We had 4, and it looks like we're probably going to be reviving that 4th breed. Original breeds that we took other breeds and mixed them together and got what we were looking for. And for each of those, ideally, we would want to have at least 50 at any given time. So the ideal thing would be for us to have about 200 chickens on hand. We don't have quite that many. I figured at the low point, late winter or early spring, when we had sold off all the pullets we were going to sell off, we were down to about 75 hens. But now, since then, we've been hatching, and um, so it was probably 75 hens and 12 to 15 roosters. So that was about 100 chickens. No, I'm sorry, about 90. And then we've hatched, we got about 20 of one kind and 25 of another, roughly 40 of another. So, that puts us in the, 150-ish range at the moment, if you count all the chicks. And we'll continue hatching until early July. So we'll probably at our high point be closer to 250 individuals. And then we keep paring it down as the old ones, time out. If we're not going to breed them, we'll butcher those out. And of course, we sell off the extra chicks that are not our ideal breeders as they get as time goes by. Each year, we see as they're maturing which are the best ones, and people will approach us for laying hens for their yards or whatever. And so here, 5 here, 10 there, 12 there. We sort of pare it down every year that way.
Tell us about the breeds, Jason, if you would.
Sure.
And how you selected those breeds and managed them.
Yeah. Well, the way that I tend to think about our work is we're looking for either through our own observations of our own needs or observing the agricultural sort of economy, as it were, seeing what the holes are, where the needs are that are not currently being filled. And so the first one that occurred to me to be interested in was that there are a number of people who are raising chickens on pasture. That it's an old system, but it's being kind of revived. And especially they're blending them with cattle in rotation. So they'll bring cattle through a pasture first, and then they'll bring the chickens after, and 2 days or so after. And the chickens will help to disperse the cow pies, spread them out into the grass so they don't make a dead spot with a green ring around it. And they also eat the fly larvae out, which reduces fly issues for the cattle. So the trouble is that system didn't really have a breed that was especially suited to work for it. And some of the people who were, using that system on their farms were getting frustrated with what they were able to get from the hatcheries, commercial hatcheries. They felt like either they were had good instincts or they were productive, and you couldn't get a reliable chicken that was both productive and had good instincts for foraging and for predator avoidance. So a neighbor of mine, the neighbor I worked for at the blueberry farm, was also keeping chickens, and he had black Javas and Americanas. And the Americanas were pretty productive, but also had good instincts and good camouflage for predator avoidance. And the black Javas were not as productive, but were excellent grazers and foragers. And so when he accidentally had some that crossed, which is something that happens if you keep them together, of course, I said, hey, if you don't want those chickens, do you mind if I would buy them from you? And so that was kind of the start of our breed that we call the Shenandoahs. And some other genetics have gotten mixed in along the way, but that was the basis of it, trying to get that good production, good camouflage, predator avoidance, mixed with the good foraging and grazing capabilities. And I would say we've achieved a lot of what we hoped for with those, but they are definitely more productive when we cross them with another of our breeds. I'll tell you about that one. That's called the Cub Run Creole, and that is that's the main one that Oak Spring Garden Foundation is focusing on in their flock. They're intended as kind of an all-around barnyard bird, but their main strength is that they are sexable which means that you can tell from the color of the fuzz when everything's going right which chick is male and which is female. And that's common on sex-linked hybrids, but it's not common. There's only a few breeds that do that from day one. So they're the only breed that I'm aware of that you can sex from day one. that is not a black barred chicken, but a colorful barred chicken, which the term Crele, Crele, refers to a bird that is barred, has the barring gene, but is also colorful background, not just a black background. So they're the only ones that are like that I'm aware of that have a cushion comb. So that's a very frost-proof comb rather than the tall points. You have just a flat comb. So they are actually some of our most productive birds of eggs, and they have a good shape for meat as well. So they're kind of an all-around frost-proof homestead or barnyard bird. And when you cross a Shenandoah male onto a cub-run Creole female, you get these really nice sex-linked hybrids, which sex-linked means that you can tell which is male and which is female, which is nice because for commercial flocks, people don't want to trouble with raising out all the males. They just want the females. So our hope is that what we end up with there is two breeds that are good on their own, but that when crossed yield a sex-linked hybrid that has the traits that people were looking for these commercial systems where chickens on pasture are following cattle, because both of the parent lines have been bred and selected for excellent foraging and predator avoidance instincts, partially being selected by the predators themselves, because we lose a few every year to predation, and presumably they more of the time get the ones that are less resistant. So you certainly can see the difference when we're able to free range our chickens. We can see a big difference in feed consumption. So we know that they are meaningfully foraging, and we can watch them meaningfully forage. And if there is a chicken that's just hanging out in the coop and not going out to forage with the others, I mark that chicken, and at the next round of butchering, it gets pulled out of the flock. Then there's the other two breeds. There's one that is bred specifically for a woodsy environment. We have that coop positioned in our woods, and we allow the chickens to free range as much of the time as we can. If we start to lose a bunch to hawks, we'll keep them in for a little while. But the Cooper's hawk does a fair amount of selection for us with the young ones, especially on that. I always hate to lose chickens, but we kind of have to let some of that happen in order to breed. So they have a very sort of a grizzled, almost like they almost look like an owl or a grouse or something. They have a very highly camouflaged appearance, and they are a very broody breed. Their tension with that breed is that they can be kind of self-sustaining to the extent possible. That they know how to forage very well, that they can raise their own chicks, that they're hardy and predator avoidant in the wild. So we kind of think of that as our breed that we're trying to semi-rewild, but keep the good homing instinct that they come home every night and can be shut in their coop. So that we call the Massanutten, named after the Massanutten Mountain, which is the view right out our front windows, and is a fully forested mountain. And so our woods is basically connected with that Massanutten forest, and so we think that these chickens could be useful for any sort of forested homestead in this general area or in areas like that. And then the last one is one that we specifically have been breeding for urban backyard pet purposes, and that's another hole that we've kind of seen in the farm economy, where there's a lot of people raising chicks and chickens in backyard pet situations. But from the perspective of somebody who's been highly focused on chickens and their welfare and their needs and breeding them and all of that since about 8 years old, I have a sense when I see a lot of the conditions that people keep chickens in their backyards that they think that they're pampering their chickens, but it's actually very stressful situations for them. And so we have tried to breed this bird to be not only very friendly and tameable, but also highly tolerant of confinement conditions that people often put them in, so that it won't be so stressed out. And with a small body size, so that it is resistant to high temperature conditions, and also with the cushion comb, again, so that it's resistant to very cold temperatures, and a round body shape so that it can be resistant to cold temperatures. The more angular body shapes tend to lose heat more quickly, and the single combs and some of the other types of combs can tend to get seriously frosted and lose a lot of body heat in harsh conditions. So the intention there is to, when knowing that people aren't gonna change their habits, try to breed a chicken that can bear up well under it. And then again, if we breed that Black's Run Brown, as we call it, Black's Run is the stream that runs through Harrisonburg, which is our closest city. So we sort of named it after that feature of Harrisonburg City, in hopes that local people anyway would connect it. And it is a brown colored bird. So if you breed a male of that Black's Run Brown again onto the Cub Run Creole female, you get a sex-linked hybrid that is very friendly and productive and tolerant of the conditions that people have in backyards. So we did have some friends of ours that took a sample of those, and they've done well for them for a number of years. So we're hopeful that we may have some products to offer, somewhat in the near future, if we're able to build out our capacity for breeding, and if we do some advertising and whatnot. I think there is a real enterprise there. I've done the calculations, and I think we'd have to have an awful lot of chickens to make it a full-time job, but it could be a good sideline for us.
So in summary then, Jason, clearly you've adapted locally with your chickens and with your produce to fit in regionally, so to speak, and in your environment.
Yep.
And you're growing what you need to grow to feed your family. How much would you say of all of that is as a percentage of a family being able to live off the land?
Yeah, the number that we often use is 80%. It could be more than that if we were willing to eat more sweet potatoes, because we produce way more sweet potatoes than we can eat in any given year. So we often use that to trade for various things for other people. And if we were to expand the grain production to include more ground that is currently lying fallow, we could get it up a lot higher than that. Probably the biggest thing that would be hard for us to shake because of how much ground it would take, I think, would be the dependence that we have on chicken feed. We eat a fair amount of eggs and a fair amount of chicken meat, and it's still not as much as the average American apparently, but we do eat a fair amount of it, and raising enough grain to be able to sustain the number of chickens that we would need for our family wouldn't be as hard as to raise the amount of grain that we need for our whole enterprise. But if we were to just have a family flock, to raise the grain to supplement the forage that they could get, would take a fair amount of ground. So right now, I would say the percentage, we pot shot it at 80%, and it could be significantly higher if we restricted our diet to just what we could grow. But if we wanted to go absolutely just what we produced here, I think we could do it. I think the 6 acres we have, even though the soil has been pretty degraded by previous land use, I think the numbers would work. But it would be, we would have to focus even harder for sure.
Future goals, perhaps.
Yes, exactly.
Appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast this month and share your enterprise with us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
And joining me now is Daniel Eady, who is the Director of Programs here at Oak Spring, who has our now regular segment Continuum. This month, Danielle's going to be talking about some of the historical aspects of the landscape. Danielle, welcome back to our podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris.
How far back are you starting now? Because there are so many different pieces of the historical aspects of the landscape.
Yes, exactly. So I know on today's episode, we had Jason and Christine talking about agriculture on the landscape today. So for this segment, I kind of wanted to touch on the history of this region and what agriculture meant historically in this area. So the first evidence we have of human influence on the landscape is actually in the form of arrowheads that one of Mrs. Mellon's gardeners found in the formal garden. And these arrowheads date all the way back to 10,000 years ago. So we know that there were people living here. And our ecologist, Michael Gage, who is one of Oak Springs instructors and who has been on the podcast previously, has done a lot of research about the human history and how that's affected the ecology of this landscape. And there's a couple of books that he's written on the landscape as well that we'll link in the show notes. So we know that there were people living here 10,000 years ago. And Michael Gage has also suggested that there's ways you can look at the landscape now and see the influence that they had. So these Native American people had burning practices that cleared a lot of the landscape that would have been forested thousands of years ago. And that created kind of this savanna landscape that existed all the way until the English colonizers arrived in the early 1700s, late 1600s. So before that, the Manahoac and Iroquois people lived on this land. And then King Charles II gifted the land to Lord Fairfax the Fifth, who then granted it to Lord Fairfax the Sixth. And then the area was divvied up into different parcels, primarily through a man, Robert Carter, was administering the land. And Lord Fairfax the Sixth was actually the first of those owners to come over and live here. And he was a good friend, actually, of the young George Washington. So there's a lot of history in this area. And after Lord Fairfax was divvying up the land, there's a number of different landowners who lived on what we now call Little Oak Spring and Rokeby. And that's true of all the surrounding parcels of land. So one of the projects that Oak Spring is involved with now is a partnership with the Afro-American Historical Association of Fauquier County. And so we are working with them to understand who the previous landowners were, dating back as far as we can go. So from the time of the English colonizers all the way through the Civil War. So that involves a lot of research into what the parcels and tracts of land actually used to look like, and then following these lineage and deeds to find out who was living there, what they were growing. I mean, many of these people were involved in agriculture. They were growing grain, wheat, raising cattle, raising pigs and hogs. And a lot of these people also had enslaved people working for them who were doing the majority, if not all, of this labor. So this partnership we have with the Afro-American Historical Association is to understand not only the landowners, but also the people who were living and working on the land as enslaved people. And the Afro-American Historical Association, for those of our listeners who might not be familiar, is an organization that's been around for a few decades, and it's led by Karen White. And they have been involved with a few different grant projects called Know Their Names. And the goal of Know Their Names is to document all of the names of enslaved people in Fauquier County, our local county. So that's a project that is really important to us here at Oak Spring, to understand the influence these people had on the landscape and honor these lives that were so important to creating this place that we know now. So that's a little bit about the history from English colonization all the way through the Civil War. And then after the Civil War, the history of the land gets a little bit murky. The land ownership was changing very quickly after the enslaved people were no longer working here. There were many war widows in the area. And then that gets us all the way to the 20th century when Andrew Mellon received the property through hearing about it from a colleague in the U.S. Treasury. So Andrew Mellon received property. He had the hope or ambition that his first wife, Nora Mellon, might be interested in living here. That ended up not happening, but his son, Paul Mellon, was very interested in the property. Paul Mellon was a passionate horse breeder and horse racer, so he was quite interested in setting up a horse breeding and horse racing operation here at Little Oak Spring and Rokeby. And as he did that, beginning in the 30s, he began buying up surrounding tracts of land and establishing this very prominent Rokeby farm. And so that was what was here through the 20th century. And it's thanks to Paul Mellon's passion for horse breeding and horse racing that we have Oak Spring Garden Foundation today existing on this property. So hopefully that gives our listeners a little bit more of historical context for where we are, Chris.
Yes, and it's interesting. You mentioned, of course, the horse breeding operation and the training operation. I think there were a few trainers there as well, the training the horses that Mr. Paul Mellon was breeding. And of course, that speaks to the land that was in use at the time and the permanent pastures, Danielle. And I think that's an interesting story in and of itself, is because that's the foundation land, if you will, the land that had never seen a plough because it was permanent pasture for horse breeding and horse training. And I think that warrants an episode all of its own, doesn't it, really, to explain more about that and how that really was the foundation to Rokeby.
Yes, absolutely. And I would be remiss to not point out that the reason that the English were so interested in colonizing this area of Virginia was because of the fox population.
Of course, yes. Yes. And that is another topic of conversation we will have. Of course, that is prominent fox hunting land still for the Piedmont hounds in that area of Upperville. Not, we should say, on Rokeby land anymore. I don't think any of it sees fox and hounds any longer, does it?
Well, we are under land conservation easement, so the hunt does actually come through time to time. So.
Okay, so we do see them coming across the land, but not to the extent probably that it was in yesteryear.
Yes, exactly.
But we should also point out for those keen listeners who know horses, who know that the hounds would not be galloping across the land where there was a breeding operation, and there'd be mares and foals, of course, turned out. So it's a very important balance that structure of land management and horse breeding operation, satisfying the local hunt. There were different pieces, different priorities in those days, Danielle.
Yes, definitely.
All right, so we will talk about that in the future, and in a future episode, and we'll have people in, I think, to talk about the history, the breeding operation and the training operation there at Rokeby and how that informed the land use back in those, as you say, the early part of the 20th century.
Yes, we're looking forward to that.
All right, Daniel. Well, thank you for coming on for this month's episode. You'll be back next month, of course, with another interesting topic that tries to link together the past, the present, and the future here at Oak Spring.
Thanks, Chris, for having me.
Our next guest is Christine Harris, who is the director of Oak Spring's Biocultural Conservation Farm. Some of Christine's responsibilities include producing fresh, ecologically grown vegetables for the Oak Spring kitchen and local food banks, and highlighting the importance of preserving a variety of Appalachian and Virginia Piedmont heirlooms and the stories that shape our connection with these plants. Oak Spring has been home now for, 6 years for you, Christine? Time flies.
It sure does, yeah. Thank you for having me. And I can't believe it's been 6 years already. Time definitely does fly when you're having fun.
It does, doesn't it? You've seen a few seasons now.
Yes, absolutely.
Have you had any big surprises as to how the elements can impact that area of Virginia?
Yeah, big time. And where we are in Upperville, Virginia, it's the windiest place I've ever been and ever farmed. And I think a large portion of it is we have a pretty big gap in the mountains. So the wind just whips through there. And there's not a ton of wind breaks where the farm is situated. So actually just this past spring, we had a kind of intense windstorm come out of nowhere and blew the roof off of our polytunnel, kind of ripped up the ridge vent there. But the silver lining was that we didn't get our indoor tomatoes in the ground quite yet. They were supposed to get in the ground the next day. So, we're just out of commission for a couple of weeks, but everything is back to normal. And yeah, the weather is, increasingly becoming more unpredictable, but it's also part of farming, and you learn to adapt and, creatively come up with solutions on the spot. And it's part of the excitement of farming sometimes too.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. So let's go back to how you got interested in this topic and just what has become, a passion for you, a lifelong passion for you. And because you're a Virginian,
yes,
from Richmond, Virginia. So tell us a little bit about your background, your childhood, and what informed your interests as you were heading to college.
Yeah. So I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, just a couple hours south of here, and honestly did not really think about food or where it came from or plants even until I left home. And I was 18 and went to George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, to pursue my bachelor's of science in biology and conservation. That was 2012. And my original goal was to pursue a career in veterinary medicine and wildlife veterinary medicine. And had just started to get interested in sustainability issues, more so from kind of like a waste perspective and diverting waste from landfills when I was in high school. So within the first couple of weeks of college at George Mason, I attended it was called Green Patriots. It was a peer-to-peer education group that the Office of Sustainability did there. We had weekly meetings. There were guest speakers and covered all topics around sustainability and environmental justice and social justice issues. And I remember that first meeting I went to, someone was like, well, if you're really interested in sustainability, you should go check out the student organic vegetable garden on campus. And I just, I wanted to get my hands on everything and kind of meet as many people that were interested in that kind of field as well. And so the garden, I figured out the volunteer hours and made my way back there one afternoon. It was like the furthest corner of campus behind this big brick dorm building, and rounded the corner, and I just was like immediately awestruck. Like, what is this place? There were big trees and peach trees and josta berries, which if people haven't heard of, it's a cross between a currant and a gooseberry. There were hardy kiwi vines, which I had no idea we could grow a type of kiwi here, and asparagus and strawberries. There was all this food, and a little pocket of students kind of hanging out and working together and laughing. And so the first thing that they had me do was jump into this kind of thicket of cherry tomatoes that had went wild over the summer. And she was like, can you help us hoist these up and get them trellised and kind of tame them so we can make it easier to harvest? And it's like, sure, I have no idea what I'm doing, but great. And I just was kind of like sitting in the center of this thicket, like pulling plants up, and I just started like popping the little ripe cherry tomatoes in my mouth, and it was just like fireworks going off. I hated tomatoes growing up as a kid. We got everything just from our local grocery store. So if anybody has had a grocery store tomato compared to one fresh off the vine or from your local farmer, that there's really no comparison in terms of flavor. And I was sitting there eating them like candy. And I think that was my first kind of aha moment with food and with farming and really with plants. And ever since then, I've just, had a love affair with plants and food. And I remember calling my mom like pretty soon after that and was like, Mom, I know I came to school to be a vet, but I think I want to be a farmer. And she, was very hesitant at first and was like, oh, you're going to university to, farm. And, but since has really come around and been so supportive. And now her yard in Richmond is covered in fruit trees and fruit bushes and medicinal herbs. And so I spent the next 4 years at university heavily involved in that garden club. I was on the leadership team. I was employed by the Office of Sustainability pretty much all 4 years of school. And really was just excited to get as many other students involved in that garden as possible. I was like, if I'm if this happened to me, I can't be the only one who, hasn't been exposed in this way. And got involved and kind of helped bring the Real Food Challenge to Mason, which was don't know how active they still are. I think they still are, but their goal at that time was to get universities to increase their real food on campus 20%. I think it was by 2020. So yeah, just worked on some small farms and kind of more like market garden sizes during the summers. And yeah, I after school, after I graduated in 2016, I was approached to help open an herbal apothecary. That was kind of my other side passion with around plants, was medicinal herbs and through kind of food and food as medicine. And so I helped open this apothecary in Paris, Virginia, which is just 20 minutes away from Oak Spring. And ran that for a couple of years. And that was really interesting too, because we had a lot of local herbal products and, jars of dried herbs, and also took that opportunity to educate customers that came in about our native medicinal plants, things like American ginseng and cohosh and, plants, golden seal, ramps even, that people may have heard of, but had no idea that these plants have rich cultural, traditional histories in this area, but have largely been over-harvested in the wild, and whose populations were really suffering. So highlighting farmers who were kind of helping to bring those populations back. And so I did that for a couple of years. And then I had this kind of moment of, I met this holistic veterinarian, and it's like, well, maybe this is how this is all coming together. And do I really want to work with plants, or should I go back to the possibility of becoming a vet? So I took a little hiatus from plant related things and took a couple online classes and worked in a vet clinic. And I was like, okay, if this is still a possibility, now is the time. And after about a year of doing that, I really missed the soil, and I missed being outside, and I missed working with food. And so went home to my partner and was like, we're going to save up money for a couple months, and I need to quit my job, and I need to get back to farming, and we should just hit the road for a little while and take a big trip. And then I need to reset and return to food and plants. And so that's what we did, and got back from our big trip. That was like winter of 2018, and started looking for jobs and came across Oak Spring and was just shocked. I'd never heard of it. And we had been around the area, Paris and Front Royal and Linden, and had never heard of Oak Spring, and just kind of came across the job posting for the biocultural conservation farm manager position, and applied and came out here, and the rest is kind of history. I've been here ever since. It'll be 6 years in just a few weeks. So it's a lot has happened over these 6 years, and I'm so thankful to be here.
So, of course, that was at the start of the farm at the BCCF here at Oak Spring. So tell us what that looked like for you, because that was quite a daunting challenge, I would imagine, your first sort of serious job in the area. And, of course, the transformation has been there for all to see since. But what were you first faced with when you came to Oak Spring? What was the biggest challenge that you thought would, get the farm established to the direction that it's intended to?
Yeah, well, the kind of like foundational mission had already been decided and discussed, as far as, creating a farm that focused on Appalachian heirloom crops and, providing some excess food to local food pantries. Like that was kind of the basic goals, creating a living seed bank of sorts. But the rest was really a blank slate, like you said. And so the area where the farm is at Oak Spring used to be cultivated when Mrs. Mellon and Mr. Mellon were still here. And part of it was used for some vegetable growing, more so for friends and family, mostly cut flower production. We have a series of old glass houses, the first one built in 1939, where the farm is today. A lot of those used to hold Mrs. Mellon's topiaries before they were moved to Little Oak Spring. So there's definitely infrastructure in place, but all of it needed updating and kind of reconfiguring to meet the needs of a vegetable production farm. So yeah, 2019, we didn't even get irrigation lines in, deer fence in, all of that kind of happened later in the summer, like August. So we kind of just grew what we could. It was a very small team. There was only 3 of us. And yeah, we grew a beautiful crop of pumpkins and melons and winter squash. And, once our deer fence was up, we, got some fall crops in. We really just kind of grew what we could in the time and just took 2019 to really start talking about what was possible here, get to know the soil, get to know the climate, start looking at some of the infrastructure. We updated an old stud barn where male horse used to hang out back in the heyday, and retrofitted that to be our wash pack station. So where all the vegetables get washed and stored away into a cold storage room before we distribute them. So, and then even 2020, I mean, we all know everything shut down in early March of 2020. So Oak Spring was just starting to plan some programming, and of course, all of that kind of got put on hold. And in a way, like, obviously did not want the pandemic to happen, but in a way, it kind of allowed us a year to really, again, like, get to know our soil, really start to hone in on what the mission was. We had just hired a chef, and the chef ended up working on the farm that whole year because we didn't really have anyone to feed. And that was great to work alongside a chef and kind of, game plan on what was possible and what a chef would want. So those first few years really were, updating infrastructure, fine-tuning the mission, getting to know the soil, connecting with community members. So I guess I should backtrack. The mission, in those early days, I really saw it as kind of a 4-fold part. It's production, conservation, education, and innovation is, what at the root, what the BCCF is, the goals are here. And so production, we provide food for the on-site chef who prepares meals for visiting artists and scholars and residents, as well as we provide the artists and residents. They have 3 meals a week together at a table where they sit down and gather, and the chef prepares a beautiful meal with farm produce. And then we provide them a box of vegetables to kind of get them through that rest of the week. And we do a 50-member CSA. We got up to 50. Those first few years, it was just kind of like 10, maybe neighbors close by during the pandemic and for the next couple of years. And then we expanded up to 50. So we have 50-member CSA. CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. So folks come on site and pick up a box of vegetables May through October. And that is more so just so we can connect with some of our, local community members, and the proceeds that we make from that CSA directly benefit our local education and outreach programs, which I know you spoke with Ginger recently. And so the funds that we make from that CSA go to her programming in the schools. And then our main mission with the production is that we donate at least 50% of what we grow to local food pantries and food banks in the area. And since 2019, that has amounted to over 140,000 pounds of produce. So I'm sure it's a drop in the bucket of, what's really needed in the area, but it's significant. I think for us is especially, it's been 6 years, but that's still relatively young for a farm.
Well, I'm just thinking now, you've mentioned the mission and some of those earlier goals. When you look ahead now, having established it over the 6 years, you've got some established roots, so to speak, no pun intended, with the produce and what is compatible with the land there. Tell us a bit more about the focus and the bigger goals now, looking forward, knowing what you can do and the possibilities of what you can do in the future, Christine.
Yeah, well, it's I feel like the past maybe 3 years, every year I'm like, okay, we're not going to expand anymore. We're done. Let's just fine tune on what we have. And every year we've expanded it bit by bit. So now I can pretty confidently say we're not going to expand too much more. The area that the BCCF is situated on, we're growing on roughly 2.5 acres of bed space and then managing about 13 acres of land. And that's where we produce the vegetables. That's what we have about a 200 hen laying flock of chickens. And our chicken manager, Nick, has been working with Jason Myers-Benner from Tanglewood Farm on breeding chickens and his chicken breed, and it was just really interesting. And they've become just a really healthy, strong chicken flock for us at Oak Spring. And then we also have a small orchard on that space, as well as the biocultural garden. So Natalie Carver, who's our greenhouse and biocultural garden manager, has been focusing, we've been growing in that space this whole time, and connecting with some local community members who have shared seeds with us, some old family seeds. And we do a couple of seed contracts every year. In that space, really, we grow the heirloom vegetables for seed saving, plants for natural dyes, paper making, fiber, some medicinal herbs, and artists and residents while they're here at Oak Spring can utilize materials from that space. But most of it is used by the local education and outreach, so with the students and adult groups in the area. So I think in terms of where we want to expand in the future, it's really elevating that biocultural garden and the biocultural conservation work even more. I think in light of the pandemic, we kind of have been really heavily more so focusing on the production side of things, because we just saw that need in our community for more food, fresh food access. So that's really where we've been putting most of our time and effort the past few years. And we're at the point now, there's always improvements to be made. There's always lessons to be learned. But that kind of is starting to feel a little bit more like a well-oiled machine. And now we can really start to elevate the seed saving work that we're doing and making those connections. And it's kind of similar to the chicken breeding. I think of the chicken breeding and the vegetable breeding and seed saving very similarly. Like there's a lot of opportunity and hope and exciting things and inspiration that can come from saving vegetable seeds, saving these heirlooms, and selecting for more climate resiliency, and while also sharing the stories that are behind those seeds. And I'm hopeful. So, sometimes these things happen in farming that are unexpected or that you don't count on, but there's always hope in planting seeds, and there's always next year. And I think that's why a lot of us get into plants, is there's always hope to be found in plants.
So in summary then, I know you touched earlier a little bit on melons and other things that grow there. What have you found has grown the best on that land, and what has not done well? What has not thrived and you've had to abandon?
That seems to change every year. We've had some interesting experiences with, you're talking about like what challenges we faced. It's every year something unique. We've remember we lost, I think it was 2021. We lost our entire fall crop of brassicas. So all of the kale and collards and broccoli and cauliflower, and, such a significant part of our spring and fall production, to harlequin bugs, which if folks are familiar, it's this little bug that can just completely decimate your crop, like seemingly overnight, sucks all the juice out of the plant. And so that was disappointing, but we pivoted. We just did mostly baby greens that fall, but we've learned, which crops we have to cover, at least until they're big enough and hardy enough to kind of fend off predators a little bit better. So brassicas can be a challenge for us, and cucurbits. So all of our pumpkins, squash, melons, we have to cover, we've learned over the years, we have to cover those when we plant them. Otherwise they'll get decimated. But once they vine out and they start to flower, we can take them off and then more easily manage the predators. But things that do well, I think that also kind of changes depending on the season and, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, those are all pretty big staples for us in the summertime.
So obviously quite a range of produce then being produced, Christine, right throughout the year.
Yeah, it's a big range, and it's always an interesting challenge and fun challenge to do the crop plan every winter and plan ahead for the season. But we want to make sure we're growing enough diversity for our chef, and make sure that we have plenty of food for, on-site use all year, while also making sure we have enough for our CSA and providing just enough diversity for the CSA as well. And then of course the mission of 50% getting donated. And that's kind of interesting because over the years, you kind of get to know the clientele through the food pantry and what folks are familiar with. And it changes like where the food pantry is located and the demographics in that area. So it's been interesting and fun to kind of figure out, okay, this food pantry really loves greens, loves, kale and collards and, the salad greens, but maybe not so much butternut squash, or this area is really familiar with bok choy. And it kind of is interesting to work with the food pantries in that way and try our best to meet the needs and wants.
Wonderful. Well, some really, really valuable work that you're doing here at Oak Spring, Christine, and I'm sure you're having a great time doing it as well, considering how the farm has evolved in its infancy.
Yeah, it's I feel so fortunate to be here at Oak Spring, and like you said, it's in its infancy, and every year is a learning experience, and also just so grateful for everyone that's come through the farm, and the folks that work on the teams. And we have a team of 4 folks that are here year round, and then apprentices that rotate yearly. And we also hold volunteer hours in that biocultural garden on Wednesday mornings. That happens through the busy season. Our first one is actually next week for the season, the last week of April, and that runs through October. And also just the opportunity to, host artists and residents and scholars and residents here at Oak Spring. They usually come and visit the farm, and we get to meet people from all over. And it's just a wonderful place to be, and I'm very thankful to be here and give back the way that we can.
Well, thank you for taking time to come indoors and record this podcast with us this month, Christine. I'm sure you're eager to get back outdoors.
Yes, there's a laundry list of things that need to happen, and it's go time. It's the second to last week of April. So we're going to be planting tomatoes and stuff here in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, it's exciting. But thank you so much, Chris, for having me on the podcast.
And that's our episode for this month. Don't forget you can find us here at Oak Spring on the website at osgf.org. You can also subscribe to the Oak Spring newsletter online, or you can email us directly to program@osgf.org. You'll find us on Instagram at Oak Spring Garden Foundation, on Twitter at Oak_Spring, at Facebook at Oak Spring Garden Foundation. My thanks again to our guest this month, Jason Myers-Benner, and to Christine Harris, and also to Daniel Eady, who joins us each month now for our regular segment, Continuum. I hope you'll join us again next month for our next episode. Until then, thank you for listening.